In this video, I'll show you how to draw an arm with structure and form. If you want to understand foreshortening, where we can show dimensionality with our arms and figures and basically everything we draw, the number one thing that will help you is the concept of form drawing. Often when we consider perspective and technical rendering, we think about lines and linear construction. But often the things that we're trying to draw aren't linear. They aren't boxes. They're more like anatomy, these complex organic forms that kind of move and curve in space. And again, when they sort of start to approach different angles, they appear even more organic, and we need to consider the form that they have. These ideas are often covered in books such as Andrew Loomis's Figure Drawing for All It's Worth, and we'll check this out to see what it has to say about form drawing, and we'll try and link up the ideas that I go over in this lesson with these types of anatomy books so that when you're actually looking at them, you can sort of see how those illustrations and demonstrations in the book might relate to how we actually use it in real life, especially if you want to draw cool, interesting things like comics or manga. The example that I often like to use in this case is Capcom Design Works. You can have the cool, exaggerated style that you might see in the Mega Man universe. You also might have the really exaggerated, but very authentic level of anatomy that you see in the Street Fighter universe. You can also see how these concepts are also applied to things like robots and a variety of different subjects. What we'll do in this drawing lesson is discuss how form and construction drawing actually relates to drawing cool, interesting things. We'll try and fold in the concepts of constructive anatomy and study and a lot of those things that you might see in anatomy books, as well as realistic anatomy, and we'll try and sort of fold that in again with cool drawings that are the kind of things that you actually might want to do. It's worth noting this is not going to be a super fast paced, quickly, slickly edited video. This is real time. It's me drawing. Think of this like a drawing lesson. You're actually going to a class and we're just going to take it easy and really go deep into a lot of these concepts because in my opinion, that's what you need to do if you want to actually get good at drawing. This takes time. We don't need to rush it. You can draw along. We can chill out. Let's get started. Alright, welcome to the Drawing Codex. My name's Tim McBurney. I've been a professional working artist for over 20 years, and on this channel, we're all about drawing cool stuff from our imagination, embracing the challenge of drawing, and mastering the craft of line and color illustration. So, when you first look at the task of learning anatomy and understanding how the human form works, or animal forms, or all the other organic things that exist in the world, it can seem overwhelming, like there's an unlimited level of complexity that we sort of have to master. But in reality, my experience is that drawing is much more a matter of just sort of putting together the same really simple ideas again and again, and avoiding making really simple mistakes. It's really just a matter of understanding, hey, this form is just made up of a whole bunch of little forms. And if you can kind of draw a whole bunch of little forms and just get good at understanding sort of structure and dimensionality with all these little sort of jelly bean shapes or very sort of simple forms like this. Again, I know lots of people talk about this, but it's true. Once you kind of get good at that, like any other skill, like riding a bike or a similar kind of task like that, it seems complicated in the beginning, right? It seems like it's infinitely sophisticated, but really once you get used to it, you just kind of start to draw that way, and it becomes a lot easier to manipulate these forms in three-dimensional space, and it unlocks a lot of possibilities. A lot of doors open to you once you sort of get good at drawing this way. Again, especially if you aspire to draw things with a lot of dimensionality, a lot of form, a lot of foreshortening, etc. Anyway, let's jump over to the drawing table and get started. All right, here we are at the drawing table. Now, just quickly before we get started, what we're going to be doing today is obviously form and construction and a lot of the stuff that comes before we kind of, create finished artwork. But if you want to learn a little bit more about how I create my own sort of finished artwork, you can actually check out my free quick start guide. It goes over the same techniques that, I would use to create, a comic like this one, the art book that I created some time ago. And it's really aimed at trying to get you up and running quickly in Photoshop with a simple, reliable line and color style. And I talk about, going from the thumbnail to the finished image. You get the PSDs and the brushes that I use. And again, I'm really aiming there to just try and get you up and running quickly with your own simple, reliable style. Anyway, the link for that will be in the description. It's free. Go check it out. So, form, and more specifically, form of the arm. Now, this is, again, a subject where mostly what I'm trying to do here is talk about form and construction drawing. And we're just going to use the arm as an example of how to do that. So it's not necessarily going to be the most accurate anatomy lesson, but we're going to try and understand how to draw well using this subject matter. Now, the real sort of key here, I think, is that we need to understand a few definitions before we really sort of jump in. And what I'll do is I'll come back to some of these sort of art books, and we'll sort of look at, again, how these sort of concepts are often applied in different styles. Again, as I always say, Capcom Design Works is one of my favorite art books, and I think it's a really good example of how you can apply these concepts across a wide variety of art styles while keeping a really, really high level of quality and solidarity despite stylization. So again, stylization can often include sort of tweaking things and having naive drawing. But when we're sort of pursuing accurate drawing, I think, again, Capcom is a really good example of mixing all those things together. We'll also take a look at some of the, major sort of areas that you might find the concept of form drawing contained within Figure Drawing for All It's Worth by Andrew Loomis, again, because that's one of my favorite books that talks about this in detail. But let's look at a few definitions to begin with, just so we can understand what the concept of form drawing is, how we sort of draw with dimension, and how that will actually relate to the arm. So the concept of form is really about dimension, and this is where often what we're trying to do, is describe the three-dimensionality of an object. When we think about form, we're really sort of talking about, again, volumes and the way that these sort of shapes are organized. If we look at sort of, something simple like this little sort of rock here, again, it has a particular type of form. And our job as artists is often to understand the form that we are drawing and understand that, again, our job is to sort of maintain that form depending on what angle we view it from. So in this case, you can see the form has a particular sort of dimensionality, a volume, but the shape and the thing that you would actually draw changes depending on where we view it from. So that's really where we sort of have the intersection between form and dimensionality versus what you actually draw. Now, one of the things that's really, useful in the beginning to sort of practice, again, is the idea of thinking about forms and how different forms will kind of look, right? So again, if we have a roughly sort of circular form, it's, just important to understand that that form has a particular shape, it has a particular dimension, and that will kind of end up with a, particular two-dimensional shape when we actually draw it. Now, your goal obviously is to draw the two-dimensional shape, and that is often what you can do. If you just practice kind of drawing, you often will sort of get the right shape and it'll kind of look like it has dimension. But to really sort of get that sense of three-dimensionality really, really working well, and again, here's a sort of little example from, just sort of some little experiment that I was doing a while back, right? So here again, we've got some, this is a sort of test comic page for, again, this sort of character walking on this giant sort of lizard cat thing. Apologies, it's a little bit light here, because again, normally I'd scan this and make it a lot darker before I sort of colored it in Photoshop. But again, we've got this sort of creature here that's being drawn from above, right? We have the creature here being drawn from the side. Now, one of the things that we sort of try and do as artists is, again, try and build our understanding of form. And the reason for this is exactly so that we can solve these types of problems, especially in concept art, comics, and other types of kind of entertainment-based representational drawing. We're often tasked with saying, hey, can you draw that thing from this angle? And that really is where the idea of form drawing comes into its own. And the idea here is to kind of separate the concept of form and thinking about dimensionality of an object from the concepts of technical perspective, because obviously they're somewhat linked. So if we look at, again, something that you might sort of normally see if you're kind of looking at, a technical perspective study, it might be something like this, where, again, what we're trying to do is draw a simple cube, right, and represent that. Now, to take into consideration exactly where this cube is in relation to the viewer's eye, there's a lot of work to be done. And often there's a little bit more to it than, you typically find in a 1, 2, 3-point perspective lesson, where people are trying to make it palatable. This stuff is really useful, but that's not really what we're talking about when we discuss form. Form really is a little bit more about trying to apply some of those same ideas that you would have in technical perspective, but sort of apply it more to these sort of organic forms like anatomy. And in that case, again, often we don't really have the ability to, properly calculate all of the angles of all the dimensional aspects of something like anatomy, because once you kind of step outside the realm of sort of boxes and buildings, which are actually quite easy to calculate with linear perspective, you have something like a skull, which has curves and all these sort of different complicated forms. We need a different tool and a different way of attacking this problem. And that is the idea of form drawing. Or, also we can sort of talk about organic construction drawing. So again, let's just, hopefully that makes sense to kind of differentiate these ideas and kind of understand where form drawing really, really comes into play. A good example of this is just if we look at the task of drawing a couple of sort of simple objects. And again, we'll get into arms pretty quickly, but this is sort of worth exploring. So if we think about the idea of drawing a cube, then okay, we could do our proper perspective calculation, which I think you'll find will help you a lot, especially if you're going to combine this cube with other things. But the real trick to understanding form drawing or, construction drawing is just to understand that, look, it doesn't really matter where our objects are in space. You don't always have to think about calculating exactly where the angles are in relation to the viewer's eye. We can just try and do our best job to make sure that they feel dimensional. And often one of the ways that we do that is to think about the idea of draw through. And that is where, again, what we're trying to do is understand the entire form. So if we think about the idea of a skull, right, and a sort of a standard Loomis construction, or the idea of an arm, what we're trying to do is understand the true dimensionality of these objects and trying to, in some ways break them down so that they're a little bit simpler so that we can draw them. But again, one of the main things that you'll find with construction drawing or form drawing is that we're often trying to find these points in space, and that we often will actually draw through. And that means that it's important for me to understand where the sort of line wrapping around this skull is going as it kind of disappears from view. And that really is one of the major differences and things that we're actually doing when it comes to form drawing. We're trying to find and feel out and understand both the drawing that we're doing and also, the three-dimensional object that we're doing through form drawing. And often the practical application of what you see with that is, again, a lot of silly lines everywhere, right? This real kind of feeling that, it's almost like you're looking at a 3D program. Now, again, this is something that takes a while to get used to if you're sort of doing it, but it really is the number one way that you can work dimensionality into your construction phase. So again, the idea here is not that we, end up with, a whole bunch of lines everywhere, but we use this as a way to build our drawings so that when we do add all these bits and pieces, that they're kind of placed in the right way. Now, this is also where what I'm suggesting is that we intersect a lot of the ideas that, again, you might find in, some cool art books or manga that you're seeing where, often we're not seeing a lot of, highly technical perspective, right? We're seeing character and emotion and color and all this kind of cool stuff. And I think this, to me, is, this is what we want to do. You don't necessarily want to be, spending your entire life doing this, right? Or this, or where is it? This guy, right? So again, this stuff is important, but the real thing that we're doing is we're preparing ourselves to do the final drawing, and we're putting our best foot forward with the form aspect of it to try and understand the dimensionality of these different objects, so that when we go in there and add our final line, we have a pretty good idea of where all these lines go. And you can sort of draw them loosely, and you can also draw them, iconically, but, they'll roughly be in the right spot. So that is the basic idea behind form drawing. This is where we draw similar to an architect or an industrial designer, and we sort of set up a good foundation of solid sort of drawing and proportion and perspective and angle. We draw through a lot. We make sure that we understand where things are from a sort of, mirroring point of view. We try and feel the form as we draw it. And you can put in as many lines as will sort of help you to understand what is going on with the form. And again, that's really what form drawing is all about. Okay, so how does that apply to the arm? Well, mostly the idea here is that you can approach this in a number of different ways. The first is just to think of these initial forms that are going to make up the arm. And often if you're really sort of struggling to, just get that sort of base dimensionality into your work, we can think about the primary forms. And that's where really we're thinking about, okay, if we look at the complexity of the arm and we sort of say, okay, I've got sort of the pectoral is kind of, connecting down here on the arm, right? And the pectoral is not really part of the arm, but, it's kind of moving in here. In the same way, a lot of these muscles on the back are actually kind of combining in here, right? There is an arm, but the arm is also part of the shoulder, and that's connected to the chest, etc., etc. What we're trying to do, though, is say, yes, but essentially we have a number of very simple forms. And the first would be the idea of the toilet roll / cylinder, where the arm is just sort of made up of two cylindrical shapes. And this is the easiest way for you to, just sort of start to break down what's happening with that dimensionality from a primary form standpoint. So this is where we're being crude, and we're being crude because often, especially in the beginning, or just in the beginning of your drawing, doesn't necessarily need to be, in the beginning of your journey, but, if you're just kind of trying to figure out, okay, like, I have an arm sort of coming at me, right? It's a lot easier to visualize that space if we think about the sort of initial cylinders that are there. And again, it's a lot easier for you to also start to visualize this space if we try and create multiple contours. So this again is another sort of topic where you might have seen lots of people use the idea of sort of contour drawing to help them when it comes to finding form. So in this case, right, we can sort of imagine here would be, right, a hand, perhaps. Boom, boom, boom. And I've sort of got a foreshortened arm. And again, this is where the primary forms will kind of help you, is firstly in just sort of placing it, right? And this is similar to like a wooden puppet or a very simple understanding of what the forms are. And that is a great place to start. Now, the thing with your sort of cylindrical forms, and I do have a video just fully dedicated to understanding the math and the science behind sort of drawing cylindrical forms, so check that out. the idea behind these primary forms is exactly that, is that there's a lot of rules we can use to make sure that you actually understand how to draw them and you can manipulate them in three-dimensional space. You may find it that, just doing cylindrical forms can be quite challenging because, again, part of form drawing is often drawing through and finding contour lines so that we kind of properly understand the form. This will help us to place additional forms that we draw, but more importantly, it will allow you to understand the form you're actually drawing, and that will actually allow you to render it if you want to put in shading or rendering or add lighting to it. If you understand what is actually happening with the form and you draw the contours in, yes, you may actually only end up drawing the shape around the edge, and you're like, well, hey, dude, why did I need to, why did I need to draw all those things? Well, it's a lot easier for us to understand if we draw those things where that shadow will be. And also if you're drawing it, right, you can, if you're doing it in pencil or you want to sort of understand where the contours are going, it's actually, a lot easier to shade with contours as well. So the idea of contour and understanding dimensionality is not just for a linear drawing, it'll also help you to understand the rendering better. So the next thing is that, okay, what do we do once we've sort of mastered this sort of toilet paper logic, right? Everything's made of toilet rolls, everything's made of sort of primary forms, right? And these primary forms would, essentially be our sphere, our cylinder, and our sort of cube or rectangle, whatever you sort of want to call it. Again, I often sort of mistakenly sort of call it a cube, but it really is only a cube if you accurately draw it as a cube, which if you study your perspective, you will probably find is more challenging than perhaps you initially thought. But again, these primary forms are good because you can practice them and then you can break everything down into that. But what happens if we actually want to draw stuff, right? Because again, this is good, but not everyone's made of toilet rolls. Well, that's when we look at the concept of form drawing as being more organic. And you can see and you can actually model a lot of the forms that you might need to draw from the anatomical forms here. And what you'll kind of see is that, again, often what we have is we have, something that is a little bit more organic. And what we can do to kind of mix the idea of an organic shape with some sense of structure is, again, to just draw contours and try and understand what is actually happening with that form. And this is actually a very sort of similar thing that you would do if you wanted to draw some very organic hard surface shapes, right? So imagine that, again, this is some form of a absurd looking car, right? Again, worst car design ever. It's a jelly bean car. But that's the idea. You really need to understand the contour of what you're drawing and understand it in perspective. But again, with anatomy, we actually have a little bit more leeway. And what you want to practice doing and start thinking about is how do we sort of modify and understand perspective and dimensionality through not just the primary forms, but our secondary forms. And again, we can revisit that concept that we talked about with the rock, where depending on how you view something, the dimensionality of it, will stay the same. But again, our viewpoint and the shape that it creates can be wildly, wildly different. But in a similar way, we can have the same shape, and depending on how we actually sort of represent that shape, we can create very, very, very different sort of forms. Or, maybe it could be the same form, but just viewed differently. And again, depending on how we draw the contours here, we can actually define even more divergent shapes and even more interesting shapes. So the contours are not just there to kind of say, hey, like what is this form? Like what's the right form? The contours are where you define what the form is, and you do it in the drawing phase. One of the reasons that we sort of do this, these are secondary forms, I'll just label that so we don't lose it. One of the reasons that you do this is because often when we are drawing in a linear fashion, right, we're trying to, create lines. This is a great example, amazing sort of Breath of Fire artwork. And I think this one's got stuff from, all of the different Breath of Fire sort of game projects. Again, I don't know whether they've made any new ones since this book was released, but this is it, right? We got lines. And the problem is that when you're drawing with line, you don't have tone, you don't have dimensionality, you don't have the painting and the shading. And that is often to your eye what really defines dimensionality. So the trick here with form drawing is that we're drawing with form. And that's where, again, we sort of really take into consideration the dimensionality of what we're drawing without actually putting shading in it. So you kind of figure out where that form is without kind of sitting there going, okay, let's define form via shading or painting. Because again, that's how a lot of people would do this, is they would sort of start from a painting standpoint and use the sort of light and shade to define where the form is. And that's great. But when we're drawing, right, if you're trying to do this, that's often not part of your process. You start with line. And form drawing, where we draw through and we draw contours, we find some of these places, we sort of trace the forms, we find the center lines, etc. That's where you can sort of get the most out of your underdrawing or your construction drawing. Obviously, once we move on from this, what you deal with is the tertiary forms, those third level forms, which are, is going to be much more if you're drawing like a finger. You could think of the sort of primary form as being like, well, look, your finger is like, it's like a toilet roll, right? It's just a cylinder. The secondary forms would be like, hey, but you notice how each sort of, phalange of your finger is kind of, shaped in this interesting way, right? So, we sort of start with a finger being like, hey, yep, it's just a simple cylinder. And then you kind of say, hey, but, it actually has anatomy, right? It has structure. And it's not quite that simple. And again, what we do is try and find and delineate that form, which again, I'm sort of doing an okay job of here. So that would be primary, secondary forms. And the tertiary forms would be, to my mind, things like the fingernail, right? It would be, again, here, the specific way of like, okay, like what happens, right, when you, when you sort of, sorry, that's a bit hard to see there. My apologies. Yeah, it's the subtleties of how these forms move as you sort of adjust it, right? It would be, these tiny little knuckle sort of protuberances, right? So just the way the knuckle kind of goes out, it might be the lines on the knuckle. All those little bits and pieces would be what we'd sort of consider tertiary form. And that's really what makes things, feel more realistic if you do have a lot of tertiary form. Or if you're drawing in a stylized way, the tertiary form, is just going to be the way that you refine all of these little details and just make the lines really, really nice. Okay, so enough foundational sort of concepts. Hopefully that's been a good refresher. Again, I'm sure that you have a pretty good understanding of some of these things already. Let's jump into, drawing some arms and see if we can sort of demonstrate this concept and again, show how these things link up to drawing actual anatomy. All right, so let's look at the most basic idea where we just have sort of an arm hanging down. And again, I'll try and draw this sort of pretty big just to give us, a good understanding of this, so so you can see it pretty large. Again, what we have is we have some sort of primary forms there. Boom. And then we have our secondary form. And I'm just going to sort of taper this primary form of the forearm because again, that's typically what you get. Then we have a hand. And let's probably just leave it something like that. Now, that is our sort of primary form. You don't always have to put these in. Now, the real thing where we sort of start to learn anatomy and try and sort of figure out some of these things is where we sort of tackle these separate muscles and how that kind of works. And most of the time what you're trying to do is, again, break it down from the largest possible form, the largest, most abstract sort of large shape / form that you can sort of put on. And then we kind of, whittle it down. Think about this as sculpture. It's a good way to sort of give yourself somewhere to start. And, it's also just, one of the better ways to do it. But again, your creative process may differ. So here, I'm going to try and think about the deltoid there. And again, specifically where that sort of deltoid is going to sort of connect. Now, you can see we're just sort of drawing shapes here. But what I'm trying to do is sort of represent and understand, what this sort of deltoid is. And it really is sort of three primary groups of muscles. We sort of got the one in the middle that, sort of goes more or less sort of straight down and sort of connects there. And then we've sort of got this other sort of, part of this trio of that deltoid muscle. And this one is sort of more at the front, right? This is sort of the one you see if you're looking at someone. And then we've got the one at the back where it sort of wraps around and actually sort of connects up here on the shoulder blade. So we've sort of got these three things that we can sort of really sort of consider to be, more or less kind of, forms that are going to feel like this. Now, it's important to state, although to me it is sort of obvious, that again, as you can look at any sort of anatomy reference, you can see that muscles don't actually come in groups, right? They kind of have functional groups, etc., but really there's just a huge variety of different muscles and, muscle fibers, and we kind of have names for them, but, they don't have names. They don't know they're a deltoid or a pectoral, right? They're just kind of, all in there, and it's very, very complicated. So when we break it down, again, part of what we're trying to do is simplify it for ourselves, not necessarily, find some truth in sort of muscles. We're just trying to make it easy for ourselves to understand. So what we're sort of doing is kind of wrapping and thinking about the fact that, again, we're going to have some of these forms here. And if we're sort of looking at this from the side, again, you can see I've got, again, a bit of that sort of deltoid there. And we, again, have sort of some deltoid stuff here. Now, again, I'm being pretty comic booky with this anatomy, and the degree to which you are sort of accurate with your own anatomy and, how sort of specific you want to be, it is totally up to you. I'm not aiming this to be a 100% accurate anatomy lesson. It's mostly to understand what the concept of form drawing is and how you sort of apply it. But what we can start to see is that if we sort of break this down a little bit, we can start to feel that form, right, and understand what's actually going on. Now, obviously, understanding also the structure of what's going on can help us as well. We've got our sort of elbow, right, that sort of tends to come somewhere over here, and then we're going to get our two bones of the forearm that attach there. Now you can also see there's a couple of major forms that are going on, and on the upper arm they are sort of the tricep and the bicep. But this is where, again, depending on what angle you're drawing, depending on what you're trying to draw, you sort of approach this differently. But in this case, it can be really useful to kind of actually think about the structure of what is happening with that bicep, right? That bicep is essentially one sort of squished, sort of sausagey tube thing, right? And again, it's actually a whole bunch of different sort of shapes in there. And if you were, studying anatomy in more detail than me, where again, I really am sort of a comic book artist, I draw exaggerated stuff. And, in many cases, I draw quite cartoony stuff as well. I don't have an interest in the nth degree accuracy of anatomical stuff. I never have to make stuff look realistic. And, again, the degree to which you want to make things realistic really will define how much you study this, right? Is the bicep just one chunk, or, is it sort of multiple ones? And again, like, to what degree do they deform when you sort of change them? You can go and make this a really, really detailed study, Or, again, just kind of try and get a very, very basic understanding of the form so that you can go and draw your cool stuff and make your cool sort of concept art, comic, etc. Everyone has different degrees to which they like to study these things. But, the bicep is, in many ways, again, just one of these sort of shapes here. And the bicep will sort of attach up underneath that kind of deltoid. And again, what we're going to have on sort of top of here, right, sort of as a general sort of mass here is sort of a pectoral muscle. Again, I'm not drawing that in any sort of accurate way. I'm just kind of indicating, right, sort of where that will be. And again, similarly, I'm drawing a lot of these muscles pretty sort of chunky, just so we can sort of see them. But here, you can look at the similar thing that is happening with the tricep, right? We've got the tricep, which is really good to view it as a couple of different sort of muscles that actually might overlap. And at the bottom of the tricep, you really get this point where you have more of this kind of tendon slash cartilage sort of stuff, the white stuff on the anatomical model. There's not actually a lot of sort of bulging muscle there, right? And then we sort of get our elbow, and then we kind of have the shape of the bone. Now, you can see that, again, this is giving us a pretty good understanding of what's going on, and it's sort of going to be easy for us to both say, hey, look how this is kind of one, shape. But you can also see that, again, like the actual, the triceps might come out a little bit more, right? There might be a little bit more of that form there. And again, I can try and shade these to kind of describe to you what's going on a little bit more, but the key here is often to construct before we shade, so you don't get sort of lost. But again, you can kind of see that there's different aspects, right? There's different sort of muscles within here. Again, I'm not normally drawing all of these. This is just a nice little sort of demo. And again, here you can sort of see that those forearm muscles are actually kind of coming out of here, right? And again, they are, this sort of shape, right? Where they kind of start, they're kind of starting and attaching underneath here. And we sort of get this sort of shape that's a bit like this. And again, it's really useful to define that there's two of these sort of forearm muscles, right? So it's kind of like this. The more you draw through, the more you understand what's going on, the easier it will be for you to sort of track these things and draw your own stuff. So there we have the basic sort of form of that, and yeah, we can sort of see that that's kind of coming round, right? And then it's gonna sort of duck down there. So this is where you get that classic, right, sort of forearm bulge that is often sort of hyper exaggerated in a lot of sort of comic books and things. Again, you can kind of see it here, right? We're sort of seeing this sort of bulge that kind of happens, right, as the sort of upper arm connects to the lower arm. And again, the way it sort of deforms is interesting as we sort of change those muscles. But again, we can just sort of think about these as being two or sort of being one. You figure out how much of that you actually need to do. Now, after this, we sort of have this sort of mess of muscles. And again, there's often the case where, depending on sort of how comic booky you are, right? You might put like a whole pile of these in, or, often people are just kind of putting, this crazy sort of patchwork of muscles here. But I think in general, if we just kind of look at how, again, these muscles of the forearm are kind of often, disappearing a little bit underneath this kind of forearm muscle here, right? That'll give you a pretty good understanding of sort of what's going on. But again, I'm not sort of a quote unquote anatomy teacher. And, if I need to draw something hyper realistic, then, I often break out the reference, but most of the time I'm just drawing comics and other things that, don't require that level of structure. Now, again, often my tip for hands is that the form is sort of important, But again, how much of this anatomy we kind of look at is, it is sort of tricky, right? It sort of really depends how much you, need to sort of articulate them. But, what I sort of find is often with hands, we're best off, and this is not really a hand demonstration, it's just kind of an arm sort of demonstration. But yeah, with hands, it's often more important to look at sort of the gesture and the character of hands than the structure, because if you draw them with too much structure, then I find they get sort of really tight, especially if you're drawing them small. Again, that's not a how to draw the best tip. That's just a, normally when I'm drawing comics day in, day out, I find the thing that makes the most difference is really, really paying attention to the gesture and the shape of the hands, right? And again, from my experience, if you want to really sort of nail that kind of feeling, reference can be one of the best solutions. So again, you can see here how we're sort of trying to build some of these forms, right? And again, if you ever get lost, think about where these different sort of secondary forms are intersecting and practice all of these different sort of forms. But it is your ability to do things like really think about, okay, like where is this bicep connecting, right? Where does it go, right? It's sort of going up in here and connecting somewhere, right underneath the shoulder there. And, if you can kind of draw that and sort of think about that and make that construction part of your practice, you're going to maybe do a bit better of a job than if you're just trying to say, okay, I got to draw the line here. Right? If you sort of think about where it's going underneath other anatomy, even if you're just visualizing it, it'll help you. And again, with all of these things, the more you practice this and the more you do it, the more you're likely to be able to just visualize where all these things are going and just draw that line well anyway. You're able to guesstimate these things much better if you've done a little bit of practice with this type of construction. All right, so next, let's look at, again, how this applies, but, from a different angle. Because, again, this is kind of all fun, but I'm kind of just copying this. How do we apply some of these concepts and change the directionality, change the dimension, change how we view them, and use form drawing to help us do that? Okay, so what we'll do is take a similar approach, right? We're going to think about, okay, here I've got a big mass of the shoulder, of the deltoid. And what I'm going to do is sort of think about where those primary forms are going to be. Right, so we'll draw a big cylinder going this way, right? And we'll sort of have it coming at the camera a little bit. Got deltoid, cylinder, right? And then we'll also have, again, this sort of big pectoral muscle. Again, just drawing in that pectoral muscle very, very roughly. Right? And again, I still always find that primary form. Right, let's have it coming this way a little bit, because that might also be easier, right? Again, changing that primary form and just sort of figuring it out with the basics is always really, really good. Again, also, if you look at other videos on the channel that talk about drawing with the Loomis Method, again, from books like, Figure Drawing for All It's Worth, etc., I often talk about, the proportion as being one of the most important aspects here, and that is where often what you're trying to do initially is just kind of say, but how big is this bit versus this bit? And that's where really what you want to play around with is just the stick figure, right? You're just playing with the skeletal version of this. So if you're struggling with proportion, like, oh man, I messed up, and now my forearm's like looking, way too long and it looks, sort of weird. That happens all the time. That's sort of very sort of normal. But just focus on the stick figure, right? Like what is the distance between these things? So again, we can use form drawing to help us understand what's happening. And I will, typically when I'm sort of doing this, again, I'm going to do a mix of understanding the form and sort of massing out the form. But, we sort of got our bicep here, right? And the bicep is sort of contracted, right? So it's going to pop, right? We can think about the basics of that are often sort of demonstrated, right? So again, if we sort of think about our arm bump, right, we got sort of, so if we have an arm here, and we got deltoid, right? If the arm is sort of let out like this, we're going to have a pretty, right, sort of flat curve here. And again, some people will kind of say, hey, we want to sort of make this one flat and this one, you know, straight. And I'm like, yeah, I feel like all those things are really, really good tips. Again, you know, that can really help with stylization. So again, if you're sort of saying, oh no, this should be front, this should be flat, and this should be curved, yeah, it's more curved or more flat for sure. The main thing we're trying to sort of look at here is, again, what happens as we, right, as we sort of contract those muscles. Right, so as we sort of squeeze this bicep, right, it contracts, boom, boom, and we can sort of visualize it there, right, getting sort of smaller. So again, here, this bicep is going to be more contracted. Now, exactly what shape it makes, exactly what sort of, you know, sort of form it has, again, is very much dependent on the exact anatomy of the individual. You can see many people are, you know, very, very different. And again, I'm just drawing sort of pretty basic sort of comic book anatomy here. Now we're going to have, again, the idea of this deltoid, right? It's kind of like, the deltoid can also be understood as sort of, you know, almost like half a sphere, right? It's kind of like, it's sort of like this form, right? It's kind of, if we sort of look at, right, it's kind of like sort of half a sphere, that kind of form, right? It just kind of rests on top of there. So that can also be a really good way of visualizing it. Again, you may see patterns here that work for you, and there's nothing wrong with that. You don't have to say, oh, but you know, this anatomy teacher taught it this way, and which one's right or wrong. The right one is the one for you, right? That is the right one. The right one is the one that helps you understand these concepts better, and understand, and helps you understand how these forms go for you. So again, I'm sort of visualizing that, and we can try and visualize the idea of this kind of bicep here. All right, we've got that thing there. We've got this sort of tricep here that again is not extended, but often when you're drawing anatomy for comic books and stuff, you know, we try and sort of make it, you know, pretty sort of chunky anyway, just for fun, right? And I would say when you're practicing these things, you know, make it exaggerated. It's a lot easier to draw things when they're exaggerated than, you know, when you're kind of trying to draw a realistic figure. I will make a video in the future, though, talking about, again, how we apply these concepts to, again, your super jacked superhero style figure. Maybe a very sort of realistic arm, like my arm, I feel like is realistic, right? You can barely see any of those, you know, sort of muscles. Again, and I'm not, you know, the most skinny person, but you know, typically, you know, when you're looking at real people, you don't see this, right? You only see this when someone has, you know, been bodybuilding for, you know, some crazy amount of time, and then they get down to, you know, 4% body fat, and they spray a whole bunch of stuff on them, you know, spray tan, and they get under some bright lights, and then you're like, oh yeah, I see all those muscles. Before that, it's kind of, you know, you don't see a lot of this stuff outside of Superman, etc. So again, here I've got the idea of these, again, I'm sort of visualizing where those bones, see if we can grab a hand off our skeleton guy, right? Sort of visualizing where these bones go, bump, right, bump. And here we got our sort of hand that, yeah, probably won't draw a whole bunch of, but just kind of put it there for fun. And here's, again, where we can use form to help us with a lot of these problems, right? So, you know, you can look at anatomy, reference, etc. But typically, you know, this is one of those things that kind of can, be sort of really fun from a shape design sort of element to draw here. And this is where we get this shape sort of wrapping around. And again, it's typically this point here, right, that we're sort of trying to represent, right? This point here as it comes down will, sort of wrap around the form, right? And it's going to sort of come up here and create its own sort of little shape, right? And then we're going to come down here back to that kind of bone, right? So we're typically looking at this form, and this is where it's important, because again, we've got the form, right, that's sort of useful to draw and sort of think about, and then we've got like the decision of, well, but what lines do I actually put in there? What lines do I actually draw? And so you have to make this a refinement sort of process. But this is the general idea. That this is certainly how I would do it. Again, I always like to stress, I'm not someone, I wouldn't really classify myself as, a hardcore anatomy teacher. I teach a lot of drawing, but, there's people who are absolutely world class at sort of understanding all the muscles and those kind of things. I'll also say, you don't need to know all of that to become a professional artist or to just draw cool stuff. There's levels to this, let's say. And again, I just say that because I know some of this anatomy I'm drawing is very comic booky. And again, a real anatomy sort of teacher would probably be like, you got that wrong. I'm like, I know. That's fine. Relax. It's all good. So again, what we can see is we have like this sort of group of muscles that, really you can kind of see as like, again, this is sort of a group of muscles that are sort of coming out of here, right? Coming down. And again, they often turn into, all the sort of tendons and sort of adjoining muscles that will sort of be able to articulate the fingers, etc. And again, I'm probably drawing that elbow pretty chunky, but yeah, typically also what you have is this muscle here, right? When we're drawing it from this angle, right? This will kind of often sort of come out of the woodwork a little bit, right? And be able to sort of wrap around there. So again, you can see I'm doing a mix of like, yeah, I have a pretty good understanding of what's happening with this form, and sometimes I'm just sort of drawing it with line. But if you're struggling, or you want to do something like put a watch on someone, you say like, oh, I want to watch. Well, yeah, it's really useful to understand, right, the basic sort of form, right? Or maybe it's like, hey, it's not a watch, it's just some sort of, some wraps or a bracelet or some sort of cool fantasy thing or whatever it is, right? It's often these contours that help. In fact, it's often, a character design trait to put these things on so that you make it easier to read and understand the form from a viewer's perspective. Because just because you can, draw something from the right angle doesn't mean it looks good, right? There's a lot of angles here where I'm like, oh, you see how the entire form kind of disappears, right? If I move the arm out, you can see like, oh, that has a better shape. That's quite descriptive. But, there's all sorts of ways where you might be able to be like, oh, yeah, that's sort of accurately drawn, but it doesn't tell you anything about the form. So, often if you have some actual sort of object that wraps around the form, it really helps you with that. So here again, what we're doing is trying to sort of understand where this form is sort of going, what's wrapping around what, and also to, you can also, if you get lost in your secondary and tertiary forms, it can be really helpful to be like, okay, look, I know I've got a million muscles here, but let's just go back to basics. Remember, this is a cylinder, right? This is a cylinder. Let's just get those primary forms there. Because one of the real tricks, especially when you're drawing stylized stuff, is that, again, you can get lost in the weeds really, really easily. And this is one of the biggest sort of traps, right? I ran into this a lot. I'd be like learning my anatomy books. I'd be digging deep. I'd be doing all this stuff, doing all the right stuff. And then, you kind of put all this stuff in and it doesn't always look good, Often it's, it's really, really important to learn to simplify. So, even though these things can be cool and it's good to kind of know, where all these things go and build the form, you also want to know, how you apply it and what you put there. So anyway, I feel like that does hopefully a good job of explaining how some of these concepts work. Again, it's not a full sort of anatomy demo or anything like that, just a little sort of demonstration. But yeah, let's check out some art books and see how people are actually applying this now that we have a bit of an understanding of it. So if we look at our Figure Drawing for All It's Worth book, right, which again I think is a great example that will actually, talk about many of these concepts. Once you have a good understanding of these principles, then you can go and look at different art books and have a good understanding of what they're talking about, right? So, here's where, again, Andrew Loomis is talking about some of the very same things that I've been talking about, right? Outlines in relation to solid form. And again, he's doing a really good sort of demonstration of that. And, I feel like if you're sitting there saying like, again, I want to draw some cool stuff, you look at comics and then someone says, hey, look at this book, and you look at this book and you're like, oh, this seems like math, right? This is boring. These are just people trying to explain these concepts, right? And it's hard to get these things into your head, really correctly in the beginning. But I find if you, practice these things a little bit and then go back to some books like this, then, you start to pick up little things here and there. You start to pick up more, understand these concepts here and be like, all right, that's what I get what they're talking about here. These things are not necessarily from my perspective, about saying like, let's copy this, right? Let's repeat what they're doing. These are just demonstrations, and the key is for you to get it in your head and start to be able to visualize these ideas. But certainly, again, if you do have one of these books or any of these sort of other other books can be very similar. There's other great books here. I just use the Loomis ones because they're some of my favorites. But again, this is what a lot of what we're often talking about is, again, separating out the sort of complex forms into these kind of sophisticated blocky forms. And the way he's representing this is with that kind of blockiness, right? But again, you can do exactly the same thing with your construction phase by, doing a lot of this. Again, the idea of foreshortening, drawing contour lines, etc., etc. Personally, my style is pretty sort of flowy, right? I draw a lot of sort of curved lines, spherical objects, right? So again, some people may have a similar approach, but they might have a much more angular style. And again, there's no right or wrong there. It's just about how you represent and understand form. But again, you can see that if you're looking at a lot of this sort of cool, sort of splash screen art, many of these same concepts are going to be contained here, and it really just is a matter of applying them again and again and again and again and again. You can see that we sort of have a good understanding here of where these basic shapes of these arms and the gloves are kind of connecting around. So it's the construction and the understanding of the perspective, right, and the foreshortening that allows you to do that. Same thing here with these sort of arms, right? We've got the same thing happening, and we can see that sort of foreshortening there. It really is just a matter of applying these concepts, practicing it a lot, and really refining your understanding of form. That really is where the magic happens, where you refine your understanding of form. And then obviously you need the skills, the technical skill to know how to sort of apply it. But again, in many cases, it's just a matter of practice and knowing, what you have to do, right? How do you get there? How do you construct that kind of form, right? Some artists might just kind of be able to, sort of draw that first go. It wouldn't surprise me if there was, a fair bit of preparatory work there, though. So again, if we sort of look at some of the even more cartoony Mega Man stuff, you can see, again, there's such solid, good drawing going on here. And there may be, lots of construction phases where all of these things are kind of drawn through, we're doing a proper construction phase on it. But what we derive from that is a very nice, clean, stylistic line. So again, it's not because something's simple that it's often not drawn with a feeling of form or construction. There's no real difference. It's really just a matter of how much you apply this to your particular style. But this is one of these deceptive things where, it's sort of cartoony, but it's really, really solid. And yeah, the direction, the path there, again, especially if you want to, draw all sorts of objects and stuff in your scene, is to be able to combine these concepts. But, again, we're just sort of looking at arms and hands and things like that. And yeah, you can see these concepts at play, hopefully here. Again, here we have a literal sort of cylinder sort of thing happening. But yeah, and next time you're kind of looking at art you like, again, just kind of see if you can break down some of these forms, have a go at sort of what's happening there. Often what you'll find is the drawing sometimes isn't even that good on drawings that I really like, but the artist has kind of done enough, and it's really working to give me that feeling of dimensionality. Again, I feel like the artist who does all these of these things though is really solid. But yeah, so hopefully that gives you an idea again of sort of how these concepts are being used. The trickiest thing is to figure out how these apply to you, right? How realistic do you want your style to be? But again, you can see here all those sort of forms that we were talking about, right? All the forms that you'd see on the écorché are kind of rendered there. And again, the rendering and the shading is quite good. If we look at some of the more sort of cartoony Capcom kind of styles, again, you can see the musculature and all those sort of same ideas being put into play. We got the primary form helping us draw sort of really exaggerated foreshortened shapes. And again, you can see here how we have, some of those same forms we were talking about before. Bicep, again, we've got those sort of arms that the muscles that transition from the upper arm to the lower arm. And again, all those ones coming out from there, bicep. And yeah, it's all a matter of sort of figuring out what kind of style and how you represent this anatomy. But yeah, if you want to draw cool stuff like manga, comics, etc., having one of these will really help. Because again, it gives you something to kind of base everything off. But again, here you got the same sort of concepts, same sort of muscles, and yeah, really cool stuff. Really solid work. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of an idea on form drawing, the idea of again practicing these kind of like amorphous jelly bean shapes. Now, if you want a little sort of takeaway exercise to play around with, I would say again one of the best things to do is this type of abstract form drawing. Think about this as if you're just literally drawing, on the phone, right? This used to be a thing, when phones were, sort of corded and stuff. But if you're just kind of chatting and maybe you're sort of drawing away, just sort of draw these little forms, right? And try and, define structure and dimensionality within them. So if you're just playing around, if you just kind of have a pencil and you're thinking like, what do I do? Just do some of these, right? And again, think about some of the forms that, might be in typical anatomy, right? Again, I've got a big sort of cylinder. It's almost like a bottle or something like that, right? Going into a little sort of cylinder here. And again, how you start these doesn't really matter, as you sort of saw, right? You can kind of sketch around and, find some, sort of forms that sort of work for you. Right? And yeah, just kind of try and see if you can find dimensionality there. No right or wrong. And again, the next thing you can play around with is trying to transition different types of form, right? So again, you might have, right, something that's kind of organic transitioning into something that's hard, and the contours are what magically allows you to tell the difference, right? So as we sort of go from being just in cube land, right? Again, rushing. So these are getting a little bit rough. My apologies, bump. Right, so we've got heart, and then all of a sudden here we're going to get, right, we're sort of going to transition to these organic forms. And again, if you ever find like, oh man, I'm drawing this curve and it's not feeling right, the trick is to draw through, right? Drawing through is what will kind of help you. And again, you can put a bit of shading in there if you find that kind of helps you. But again, the key is just to really sort of practice and get good at, controlling form, right? Making it feel dimensional. Find the lines that help you to find that form. Put them in there. See if you can draw them through. Where do they start? Where do they stop? Etc. So anyway, hopefully that one has been informative and interesting. Let me know if you got any comments or questions or suggestions or requests for future videos. Other than that, we'll catch you around. Happy drawing.